It was a cool autumn evening when my friends and I decided to visit a carnival that had just set up on the outskirts of town. The locals called it the Carnival of Mirrors, though no one seemed to remember when it had last come to town. The whole thing felt off, but we were thrill seekers, always looking for the next adrenaline rush. Plus, I couldn't back out after Ben dared me to go. We paid for our tickets at the gate, the woman working the booth barely acknowledging us. I noticed her hollow eyes for a split second before she turned back to counting her money. The lights of the carnival flickered as we walked in, casting eerie shadows across the ground. There was a strange silence in the air despite the flashing lights and music that seemed to echo from every direction. We walked through the carnival, playing some games and going on a few rides. But there was something unsettling about the place. Everything seemed just a little too worn down, too dusty, as if the carnival had been forgotten by time. There were very few other people, almost like the carnival was performing just for us. As we were walking past the funhouse, Ben grabbed my arm. "Come on, man," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "You've got to check this out." Reluctantly, I agreed, and we walked inside the funhouse. The entrance was a tunnel of mirrors that seemed to distort our reflections in strange, unsettling ways. The deeper we went, the more twisted our reflections became. My image looked stretched, as if I was being pulled from all directions. Ben was laughing, but something about the reflections made my skin crawl. About halfway through, we realized the mirrors weren't just distorting us, they were changing us. My reflection no longer looked like me. It was taller, its eyes sunken and wide, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I looked at Ben, and his reflection was even worse. His eyes were missing, his face pale like a corpse. "Ben," I said, my voice trembling, "let's get out of here." But Ben seemed fascinated by the mirrors. He pressed his hand against one, his face twisted in morbid curiosity. "Do you see this?" he asked, as if mesmerized. "It's like it's alive." As he said that, his reflection smiled, a smile that Ben wasn't making. I grabbed his arm and yanked him back, but the mirror moved. A ripple spread across the surface as if it were made of liquid. My heart raced, and without thinking, I turned and ran, dragging Ben behind me. We bolted through the rest of the funhouse, the mirrors warping more with every turn, distorting our surroundings until nothing seemed real. The exit felt miles away, and the deeper we went, the darker it got. The reflections weren't just reflections anymore. They moved on their own, grinning, reaching out for us. When we finally burst out of the funhouse, gasping for breath, the carnival looked different. The vibrant colors and lights were gone. The place was dark, abandoned, and crumbling. No one was there, just silence and the faint creak of old rides in the wind. We ran for the exit, but it was locked. Panic surged through me. There was no way out. The mirrors had shown us something terrible, something that had now become real. That night Ben disappeared. I searched the carnival grounds for hours, but he was gone, lost in the funhouse or something worse. When I told the police, they searched the place, but found nothing. The carnival, they said, hadn't operated in decades. But I remember the mirrors. They were alive. They wanted something. And I fear that Ben is still there, trapped inside, forever reflected in the distorted glass. My friends had convinced me to go to the traveling carnival that had rolled into town. I wasn't particularly excited about it. Carnivals always gave me an uneasy feeling. The smell of old popcorn, the creaky rides that looked like they could fall apart at any second, it wasn't my scene. But I couldn't say no to a challenge. It was already dusk by the time we arrived. The sun was sinking below the horizon, casting long shadows over the dusty grounds. I noticed right away that this carnival was different. The rides looked ancient, almost as if they were relics from another era, and the workers, those few that I saw, seemed out of place. They moved slowly, their faces obscured by shadows, barely acknowledging anyone. We spent the evening going on a few rides, and I even won a cheap stuffed animal at one of the game stands. Everything seemed fine at first. But when we reached the fortune teller's tent, things started to change. The sign above the tent read, Madame Esmeralda, Seer of Souls. It was the kind of thing you'd laugh at, but something about the tent unsettled me. I could feel the air grow heavier as we approached, like the very ground beneath us was watching. Ben was the first to step inside, dragging me along. The inside of the tent was dimly lit, with only a small lamp on the table. Behind the table sat an old woman, her face hidden behind a veil. She motioned for us to sit down, her bony fingers pointing at the 2 chairs in front of her. "Who seeks the truth tonight?" she asked in a low, raspy voice. "Truth?" Ben laughed, but I could tell he was a little nervous. "We're just here for a bit of fun." The woman didn't laugh. She just stared at him, or at least, I thought she was staring. Her eyes were hidden beneath the veil, and I could only make out her thin, wrinkled lips. "You," she said, turning to me, her voice dripping with certainty. "You carry a shadow with you." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "What are you talking about?" "You are being followed," she whispered. "It waits. Always watching. Always hungry." Ben snorted, clearly unimpressed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the old woman knew something I didn't. Something dark. We left the tent, but the mood had shifted. The once lively carnival seemed quieter now, the lights dimmer, the air colder. And then I saw it, a figure, standing in the distance near one of the rides. It was tall, impossibly tall, its outline hazy, like it was half made of smoke. It wasn't moving, just watching. I blinked, and the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ben turned to look where I was pointing, but there was nothing there anymore. "See what?" I didn't answer. We continued walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every time I looked behind us, I thought I saw the figure again, standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching. By the time we left the carnival, I was on edge, paranoid, my heart racing with every shadow. The figure had been following us. I knew it. I felt its eyes on me. When we got home, I didn't sleep. The image of that tall, shadowy figure was burned into my mind. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Objects in my house moved on their own. Doors opened and closed when no one was near them. And at night I heard whispers that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. One evening, I looked out my window, and there it was again. The figure. Standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the fence. It was closer this time, its outline clearer, darker. And it was looking directly at me. I shut the blinds and backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew then that the fortune teller was right. Something had followed me from that carnival, something ancient and hungry. And no matter what I did, no matter where I went, it would always be there, waiting in the shadows. It was a cold autumn night, and the carnival was winding down. The flashing lights of the games and booths were flickering off one by one, and most of the crowd had already left. My friends had decided to call it a night, but there was one last ride I had in mind, the Ferris wheel. Something about it drew me in, tall and glowing against the dark sky. I told my friends I'd meet them at the exit after one last ride. They shrugged and headed off, leaving me alone. I walked toward the Ferris wheel. The old man running the ride glanced at me with a blank, tired expression, as if he didn't really see me. I handed him my ticket, and without a word, he motioned for me to get on. The metal seat was cold, and the creaking of the gears filled me with unease. As the wheel began to turn, I leaned back, trying to enjoy the quiet and the view of the carnival below. The wheel rose slowly, steadily, and the higher I got, the clearer the view of the entire carnival became. The sounds of laughter and chatter below faded into a distant hum, and a strange feeling of isolation settled over me as I reached the top. But then, suddenly, the wheel stopped. At first, I thought it was just part of the ride, maybe waiting for more people to get on. But when I looked down, the carnival beneath me was empty. The lights were still on, the rides were still moving, but there were no people. Even the operator had disappeared. My heart pounded in my chest as confusion turned to fear. I glanced around, but there was no one. The booths were dark, the pathways empty. It was as if I was the last person left in the world. The sounds were completely gone, replaced by a heavy, unsettling silence. The air suddenly felt colder, and I had the eerie sensation that I was being watched. Slowly, I turned my head. Sitting in the seat across from me was a man. Or at least, something that resembled a man. He was dressed in an old, tattered suit, something that looked like it was from the early 1900s. But what was most disturbing was his face. Pale and gaunt, with hollow, dark eyes that stared straight ahead, unmoving. I froze in terror. He wasn't there when I got on, I was sure of it. The seat across from me had been empty. I wanted to speak, but it was as if my throat had closed up. He didn't move, didn't react. He just sat there like a statue, staring ahead, as if I wasn't even there.